clouds. Unfortunately, when they come out of this, they go down into a fit of depression.
The authorities' efforts to suppress cannabis took a knock with the arrival of the hippie movement. Far from being depressed, these were people who trumpeted the beneficial effects of the drug on their lifestyle.
I guess I first became aware of dope in about 1968 when I was 17 and first came to London, and people were smoking dope, and it was part of a hippie culture. It went along with communes and brown rice and free love and not having to get married and working in a counterculture kind of way. And we would always say, that smoking dope was a lot less dangerous and damaging to you than your parents' dry martinis in the evening.
The media found hippies fascinating, and some of TV's best-known journalists went to America to report on them and on the prevalence of pot. Michael Parkinson went to a love-in.
The hippies call themselves the love generation. The one love they all share is not something you see, but something you smell. It is the unmistakable aroma of marijuana, and no amount of burning incense can disguise it.
They publicised it very heavily because everybody's sort of archetypal image of the 60s hippie was somebody too stoned or stupid to even work out how to ring the speaking clock, and that kind of led to the mythicised version that all drug use was about getting completely obliterated and regressing to a kind of Stone Age level of consciousness.
Charles Wheeler dropped in on the hippies of the Morning Star Ranch.
Among the woodland hippies, marijuana is smoked quite freely. Joints are passed round like pipes of peace. Some of the hippies have found contentment at the Morning Star, and they clearly hope to stay.
There's lots of good people. It's a beautiful place.
Do you like the solitude? Super. Or the company?
Both.
Both. What about the drug thing? How important is this?
To me? Not very. I like it.
Yeah.
But if it's not here, it's not here.
There was a bewilderment, really, I think about it, is not knowing quite what to make of this, because these were huge numbers of people coming together and being quite happy to live in a field for 3 or 4 days, and things like that had just not happened, so therefore they were newsworthy. So on the whole, the news reports were pretty straight.
And the roving eye of Alan Wicker observed the alternative tribes of Haight-Ashbury.
Hippie philosophy is hostile to hard drugs like heroin, but based on psychedelic drugs which provide instant mysticism like LSD, peyote, marijuana. They swallow these mind-expanding drugs illegally, while the coachfuls of tourists who daily come to stare at them stay legally hooked on booze, cigarettes and tranquilizers. Hippies have a clear vision of the ideal community. Everyone turned on and beautiful and loving and floating free. They work a little, beg a little, and though as rebels they may be parasitic, they're earnest and peaceful, sometimes utterly peaceful.
It's hard now to grasp how much the hippie movement worried people, but worry them it did.
This was a new generation who were behaving in a very incomprehensible way to their parents. I mean, this was an age of rebellion. I think people's backs were put up, and so they wanted to kind of stamp on it, and it was difficult to know what to stamp on, but one of the things you could stamp on was get a bloke who was smoking a joint. You couldn't really prosecute someone for having long hair and walking around Hyde Park in bare feet.
The authorities felt they'd lost control. Their way of trying to regain it was often by brute force.
One of the most iniquitous things about the whole situation in the 60s was that the police would kick down front doors and bust you in the middle of the night. And actually one of the reasons why release started was because what started happening is just people would disappear off the streets.
I've got a search warrant. I'll show it to you if you like to. Somebody stand at the door. Nobody goes out.
What happened was that in order to kind of threaten and harass the alternative society, the police started to pick off our heroes to make an example of our heroes.
There was a particular detective sergeant in West End Central who really made it his business to go in for star busts and would stomp around London with his lads, desperately looking for people so that he could get, front page coverage.
They arrested Jagger for having a few pet pills he'd acquired legally. and the judge was determined to make the most of it. And then later on they started to bust the vehicles.
Ow! People gather around me, who it may concern. I'm not trying to run your life, but you're never too old to learn. Stop worrying about your neighbors and the fancy thing they got. God bless you, you're trying to shoot, you're going to wind up on the spot.
It began to look, even to the media, as if the whole thing was a witch hunt. Eventually, the Times, in a famous editorial in '67 called "Who Breaks a Butterfly on a Wheel," particularly about the Mick Jagger, Keith Richard bust, saying that it really had gone too far.
This was the first real indication that not everyone agreed with the persecution of pot smokers, and it didn't go unnoticed.
But a lot of us, I forget who started it, said it would be a good idea to put a letter in the Times saying that the law against marijuana was unenforceable in practice and anyway ridiculous. And so we all did sign it. I signed it among many others, including several of the Beatles. A huge list, and very distinguished people, MPs, quite a few dons. So it didn't have any effect.
Mick Jagger successfully appealed against his conviction and was flown by Granada Television to confront the press and leading establishment figures, including the editor of the Times, William Rees-Mogg.
Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones leader, sentenced to jail a month ago on drugs charges, is free. Earlier today he won his appeal against the prison sentence, and tonight he flew by helicopter to an outside broadcast location 30 miles from London to appear in World in Action. Publicity since the case has shown up a split between the society which resents the anarchy of people like the Stones and that which favours greater individual freedom. Tonight, World in Action examines the reasons for this split.
You're often taken as a sort of symbol of rebellion. Do you think that the society that you live in is one you ought to rebel against, or do you think you're rebelling against it?
Yes, definitely rebelling against it. I mean, not in the obvious way that a newspaper or pop sort of headline would do it. But obviously we feel there are things wrong with society. But I haven't, until very recently, been into this kind of discussion at all, because I haven't really felt it's been my place. Lord Parker today said you have a great responsibility. It's a responsibility which has been so much pushed upon us, rather than the influence that we have has been pushed upon us, especially during this drug thing. We was asked to make certain pronouncements on it, where this is really, all this kind of thing is really part of one's private life. Before this, I didn't really want to talk about it.
By the time Paul McCartney was charged with growing marijuana on his farm, a certain levity had even crept into the news reports.
As he left the court, McCartney, who'd been given 2 weeks to pay the fine, said, "The judge is a great guy." It was said in court that you had considerable interest in horticulture. Now, this might surprise some of your friends. When did this start?
A couple of years ago,
And where have you been doing your gardening, etc.?